Welcome to the podcast, Dvir. It's a great pleasure to have you. You are the Vice President of Marketing at C2A Security. But before we delve into any details on GenAI, use cases, etc., let's talk about yourself a little bit first. What brought you to the automotive industry?
Yeah, cool. So thanks again, Fabian, for inviting me to talk here. So actually, I've been somewhat of a petrol head, like for since I can think basically remember. I grew up at a farm here outside of Israel, so we had like fields. We had I actually drove a tractor for a while. That was actually my first driver license that I took out. So I was that guy that came with a tractor to high school, and pretty much I can remember my father coming home back from his business trips. I mean, he always like brought up those magazines that he had back then. When you even today, I think you can find those at the airports when I usually go, like Car and Driver and Driver magazine. So I used to sort of read through them at night. And then when I was on the road driving or commuting with my parents, I used to sort of try to identify the different vehicles and remember their specs, like what's the horsepower, is it automatic, transmission, gearbox, stuff like that. And I think since then I was pretty drawn to this field with anything that has to do with wheels, 2 or 4. So I also like cycling. Took out afterwards a motorcycle license, and then obviously a car. And I think that being here in Israel, it's pretty obvious your path in terms of how you jump from your academic lecture to the military service, obviously, and then you continue on in your day-to-day life. So for me, it was actually, I think, I wouldn't say I fluke, but it was like a very interesting switch to the automotive industry because I used to work for, I was a freelancer. I was sort of like a VP marketing for hire back in the day. I think it was 15 years ago, something like that. Worked with a bunch of startups here in Israel, B2B, most of them, offering services from whether from strategy to PR to content. And one of the customers that I worked for, he joined this automotive startup that was, and he was looking actually for someone to help him with the marketing. His startup was closed afterwards, and then he joined another startup company, and it was called TowerSec. And TowerSec was just acquired by Harman, which is a tier 1 supplier to the automotive industry.
Yeah.
And he asked, okay, Dvir, do you want to join up? I mean, I'm looking for someone to help me with the marketing side, which just got acquired. So to me, I was equivalent into like being this kid in a candy store, like coming into the automotive industry. And I think one of the first things when I spoke about with my wife, we talked about like what it means, because being a freelancer, you have certain advantages, like you can select the customers, you work at more flexible hours. And here at TowerSec and Harman, there was an extensive extensive travel schedule. But I told her that, well, I'm just getting started, so it's not like I'm gonna like travel next month or something like that. And 2 weeks after, I had to go to Europe, yeah, on a business trip. So long story short, I've been in the automotive industry for almost a decade now, jumping between TowerSec and then at Harman, spending 5 years, moving on to another startup company called No Traffic that's in the traffic management, more the mobility side of things, working a lot with municipalities and the government. And then 2 years ago, I came back to the automotive cybersecurity space. It's my second tour with C2A Security, and haven't looked back. So exciting stuff.
That's a fascinating journey. What do some of your current roles and responsibilities include in your current position?
Well, I think that being a head of marketing in any company, I think especially in a startup company, eventually it's split into two different disciplines. You have everything that has to do with lead gen, and on the other side, the brand management, the brand awareness. So at C2A Security, being a cybersecurity company, we work directly with the car makers and the tier one suppliers. So everything that has to do with lead management, account-based marketing, working with our PR team, analysts, developing content, thought leadership. I think that one of the key things that I always try to strive is trying to identify how do you make a differentiation within the market? How do you capitalize on, first of all, the human capital that we have? I think that's very unique, especially in the startup scene, especially in Israel. We have a very strong and diverse team that's coming off very specific technology domains, whether automotive, cryptography, network security, and at the same time, I think that it's easier to say something that you do. It's very hard to sort of show it, especially in our industry. So I strive to really put the spotlight on the technology, on the product, on the value that it creates to our customers and the way that they use it, and some of the ways that it helps them, that it empowers our customers to be successful in their role. So this is, I think, the scope of what I'm doing among very other things. I'm also a member of we have a forum here in Israel called the GCMO, which is the Global CMO Forum for Israeli VP marketing or CMOs that are leading global companies. I think that it also ties to other aspects of I think what makes Israel a bit unique in that aspect, but that group of marketing leaders that you can just like I'm calling it like a WhatsApp away. Like it doesn't matter what type of question or what am I trying to tackle or address. I can just like type in a question, like our own ChatGPT thing, like type a question and get multiple answers and multiple help from various people that you know are addressing some of the challenges that you are, and probably did something similar or addressed it in previous roles. So having that community at your fingertips is very helpful. Yeah.
Lots of advanced technology companies, especially in the wider automotive and mobility space, are based in Israel. I know Volkswagen has a subsidiary there that's very much focused on cutting edge technology. We've got Mobileye and many others. How would you describe the current state of technology, especially with regards to automotive in Israel?
So that's a very good question. I think that what we saw, and even though Israel is not a manufacturing country, like we don't manufacture cars, but I think the sheer scale of companies that you have here that are dealing with whether automotive or mobility is a very exciting, I would call it, case study for other countries. I think that it started off, I think it was around 2010, 2012, if I remember correctly. There was this, when I joined TowerSec back in 2015 or 16, there was this government initiative called EcoMotion that was basically aimed at connecting Israeli startups with global car makers and the larger automotive community. And I think that the reason that now you see VW or Porsche or Mercedes-Benz has a very large R&D center, GM, Ford, Harman acquired 3 startup companies here in Israel. So it's really a mirage of different organizations, companies, government that are pouring into this ecosystem and really building out a way to support, on the one hand, Israeli startups that are looking to go out to the public stage and to global markets, and at the same time really putting a spotlight and helping those global multinational companies to understand that there is actual innovation, there is actual talent that's happening here in Israel, and it's something that is worth tapping into to really stay ahead of the competition and everything that's happening within this industry. And we saw with Mobileye, with Innoviz, there's some great success stories coming out of Israel, partly because of that government initiative that started out 10, 15 years ago and is still paying dividends.
That's fascinating. Certainly a lot other organizations and countries can learn from. Moving into the GenAI space in the automotive context, how would you describe to someone who isn't so involved in the details as we are the state of GenAI in automotive?
Well, that's a great question. I think that generative AI obviously is a disruptive technology, like I think in any other industry that it touches. But at the same time, I think that automotive is, because of its legacy and because of the implication that it has, it's an industry that is taking maybe more calculated steps into how am I adopting generative AI. And up until now, the examples that I saw, for example, is most on the consumer side. How do you handle sort of in-vehicle experiences? How do you handle the entire customer journey, the buyer journey, when you're buying a new car? I think there are also exciting elements around design and simulation, specifically if you're talking about autonomous vehicles, level 4, level 5, SAE level 4, level 5, obviously. So that really helps out. At the same time, I think it's important to understand sort of what are some of the limitations and constraints. So especially when you're going into development, when you're looking into everything that has to do with software-defined vehicles, because companies of all sizes are also leveraging generative AI into their development processes. So what does that impact on your bill of material, for example? If you're a car maker, if you're a tier one, if you're a company supplying to the automotive industry, and you're using generative AI within your tool chain, how does that sort of drizzle down into the bill of materials for the car makers? And there are very different implications, like cybersecurity, for example, but not only that, privacy as well. So I think it's good that we're sort of taking baby steps in a way and really experimenting with it. And at the same time, it's more of a trial and error. Like I think any company, especially in the automotive industry, I think the big ones are really looking at how do I make this technology work for me and generate the value that I can actually showcase to the customers.
That's fascinating. There are a couple of topics I would like to delve a little bit deeper into. Initially, you mentioned that loads of these incumbents, of course, bring a lot of legacy and are inherently risk averse. It's how they've operated over the past decades. Do you think that they potentially need to change their organizational culture and approach to Gen AI to make this successful on a larger scale beyond sort of isolated proof of concepts and minimum viable products?
I think that change is already happening. I think that it started off with the software-defined vehicle. It started off even before that. We had, like, you've been around with me in this industry, we had case before that, like the connected, autonomous,
shared and electric, yeah.
Shared and electric, yes, thank you. And now that's sort of transitioned into the SDV and the shift left everything. So I think the car makers are already making this transition. So, but still, because it's like that Titanic, like turning this ship I wouldn't even say around, but like turning it sideways and deciding on which direction are you going. This is something massive. It's not like I heard once the head of software and services at Ford. He was at another podcast that I listened to, and he said, "Listen, it's not about like I I, I can't just hire 4,000 engineers to develop software. Like that's not the case because I need to find the best ones that can help me achieve the goal that I'm aiming. So it's not just a matter of bringing in or putting down thousands of engineers, which I'm missing anyhow, but it's understanding how am I leveraging the scales and how am I leveraging the benefits that I can pull from that. So I think companies are already making this change. And same with Gen AI, they understand that it's a necessity. It's not something that you can avoid. There are obviously advantages to using it. And I think each company, similar to what we're still seeing around data, every car maker now wants to be Tesla. Every car maker wants to own as much of its technology stack as it can because they understand that sort of data is the new oil or data is the new electricity, if I'm paraphrasing to EVs now. So I think that eventually car makers would want to know, how am I making the most of that Gen AI hype? Whether it's a hype, whether it's not, but everyone using it, everyone's talking about it. Um, I saw that Daimler, Mercedes-Benz introduced it into their vehicles. So now the Hey Mercedes also incorporates some forms of generative AI. So how does that help the customer experience? So there are different facets to how you address it. But I think as long as you're open to trying out new things, and doing this trial and error phase, it's I would welcome it anytime, for sure.
What do you think are some of the biggest risks and challenges some of these incumbents face when it gets to being successful in the Gen AI game? You mentioned culture and data. Are there more?
Privacy, of course, security are two challenges. I think that whenever, and we're seeing it also happening in other industries, that there is always this fine balance that you need to draw between how much of the technology you adopt versus what are I would say, the challenges that you bring forth by using it, that you include when you're using it. A lot of developers, even myself, like from a marketing perspective, like everyone is in my team is using Gen AI in some way or form. So whether from generating social posts to working on design to developing ideas for surveys, there are different elements of generative AI that apply to basically any role within a company. So especially if you're looking at the development phase, when you're using code that was generated by AI or that was supported in a way by AI, you automatically bring forth certain challenges from a security standpoint. So how do you address that? At the same time, using generative AI for security can help you fast track your regulatory compliance, for example. So one of the products that we introduced last year is also around generative AI and how do you do automated threat intelligence, for example, by not having, I don't know, 30 analysts in a room, but just having one Gen AI agent who's helping you out and putting everything into context. So these are, I think, some of the challenges that companies are facing. I think privacy is probably on their highest level of concern, I would say, purely because it's heavily regulated, and especially if you're in the European Union, which is much more forward-looking and much more conservative in terms of their regulatory efforts. So I think that anything that's to do with regulations and generative AI, I think even the EU is the first to introduce now the GenAI Act. So that's something that will hold forth a lot of discussions moving forward for car makers and the industry.
What we see a lot with regulation, that it's usually, just given the nature of how regulation is created, lacking behind technological advancement. From a marketing standpoint, do you think there is a risk to the brand and reputation of some of the incumbents, which is so critical when they now start to introduce some of the GenAI solutions?
Yeah, definitely. I think that regulation, as we saw before, I think regulation usually goes a step behind innovation. But I think the odd thing with GenAI is that actually it's not ahead of the innovation, but it's closer behind. Like especially with the AI Act in Europe, it's really like I think it's like 12 or 18 months since like OpenAI introduced ChatGPT to where the European Union actually set forth this AI Act. So true, it's Europe, which are much more conservative and much more protective of their citizens compared to, I don't know, like the US or other markets. But I think that here specifically, the regulation is really close behind the innovation part, and the industry at large is looking for ways to really manage and trying to automate some of it, because it can be a jungle, like really just trying to understand how do you navigate between the different regulations, the requirements, the different markets, what do they mean, what do you need to have in order to be compliant. And it's not only the hardware or the software on the products that you create, that you produce, but also, as you mentioned, the internal processes. And we already saw, for example, with Porsche, I think it was a few months back, that they decided to stop the sale of the Macan model, the ICE model, because they couldn't make it compliant with UN Regulation 155. So that by itself is a major sign of how car makers are trying to adapt, to that impending regulation in order to be compliant. So I think the same thing will probably happen now with generative AI, because it is more of an innovative field, and companies are still trying to understand how do we tackle it, how do we make the most of it while keeping our IP more private.
You mentioned OpenAI there. There are, of course, lots of companies, including all of the technology companies, that now integrate a form of GenAI into their existing solutions, whether it's IBM, Google, Microsoft, Atlassian. They all now announced AI solutions, GenAI solutions for their existing technology that's already being used by lots of these incumbents. And then on the other side, we've got, I'm not sure if GenAI native is the right terminology here, but some of the companies like OpenAI that are essentially, just leading in the space from a development standpoint that loads of the existing incumbents look to partner with. How do you see this field playing out with regards to, do you think incumbents will insource more of the GenAI capability and essentially develop their own models, develop their own capability, and essentially drive this themselves? Or do you think they will rely more on external partners like OpenAI with their models and knowledge?
It's a great question. I think it boils down to strategy and how much of the technology stack and the data you want to maintain under your domain, for example. Because when you're using ChatGPT, for example, in OpenAI, that's OpenAI's. But if you're using, I don't know, Llama 2 or Llama 3 from Meta, that's more of an open source. So you can use and develop your own LLMs, and you're not sort of tied. It's not something that is owned by another company. There are obviously advantages and disadvantages to each path, because if you're opting for the latter, like we did with our GenAI layer, so more of the development effort falls on that company rather than using existing models that are already trial tested, proved in the industry. So I think eventually it boils down to how much of control maybe do you want to have on your future models and the data that you generate from it. Commercialization efforts, what do you plan to do with that use of generative AI? So I really don't have like a clear-cut answer. Like, I think both approaches work, and I'm guessing that we'll see, we're already seeing like both of those operate, because in the one axis you have, again, Mercedes, who are doing ChatGPT within their consumer voice recognition within the car. On the other hand, I think it was, can't remember who started to work with Microsoft or Meta on their Llama model, and that's more of an open source. So you see both approaches work, and I think that we're still in the very early stages of adoption here. So it's not like there would be one approach to rule them all. I think these two paths will still sort of continue pretty in parallel to one another for a few years. Yeah.
What do you think are the implications of GenAI on product security, especially potentially with regards to simulation and level 5?
So this is an exciting domain, because I think there is much more you can do and achieve now with GenAI around simulations. For the autonomous vehicle, it opens up a lot of opportunities, because you still have to drive. There's still these miles driven that we saw, whether on the NHTSA report, that are measuring and are giving licenses to, whether it's Waymo or to GM's Cruise, or other autonomous vehicle companies. But at the same time, you don't have to really actually drive all those miles. You can do everything or most of it also in a simulation. So having that capability and that availability of technology to start doing that through GenAI, it's very powerful for any company who's entering. I think it lowers in a bit the entry point, or the amount of capital or technology that you need to have in order to start something in this domain. You still need to have a lot of capital to work in this space, and a lot of patience. But it really speeds things up, I think, compared to where the industry was 8 to 6 years ago, when autonomous was one of those case acronym letters that was really starting to push forward, and everyone was saying, yeah, in 2020 you're going to drive in autonomous taxis all around New York City and LA, for example, which didn't happen in reality. I think that for security, it also poses interesting prospects on how do you automate a lot of the work that you're now relying on security experts, security engineers that are lacking purely. You have, as an industry, I think we're lacking. We're recording this now. It's Black Hat in Las Vegas. So I think all of the cybersecurity industry is lacking 3 million software engineers and security professionals. So GenAI will definitely help, in a way, close the gap, at least automate a lot of the work that we're trying to do and trying to build on, whether around threat analysis, how do you translate complex security into more day-to-day terms and day-to-day actions. So if you have some sort of a vulnerability, that's happening in one of the code of the, I know, libraries, packages, how does that interpret into actual resolution, actual mitigation, what needs to be done in order to get that product to a safer place compared to what it was. So there are a lot of interesting and exciting prospects here from what I'm seeing.
Mm. Fascinating. Building on that final question from my side, imagine you're talking to a marketing, security, and/or technology leader at one of the incumbent automotive companies. What would be your top 3 recommendations with regards to making GenAI a success in their organizational function?
I think that first of all, experiment for yourself. I think that it's important for any technology, especially when we're leaders in a company, to try it out for ourselves and understand, first of all, what it can do, and then from that deduce, okay, what it cannot do, what are some of the challenges, what are some of the dangers by adopting it. The second, I think that it's not we're still at least not in this one method, one approach takes all. So experiment with as many tools, as many vendors, as many opportunities, as many, I would say, companies or technologies that you can, because you never know from where this entire value would generate. You never know. Eventually, we're here to have, I would say, please customers. We hear about the consumers. We hear about making commute passengers safety much more, I would say, pleasing, obviously safe, having the customers understand that they have everything that they need at the palm of their hands. So how do you make that happen through GenAI? And I think the last part is also understand some of the challenges, especially on the security side and the cybersecurity side. What do they mean? And how do you properly address those when you're deploying such technology? So I think these are my top 3 recommendations to someone who's trying out GenAI in our industry.
That's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining me on your podcast, Dvir. Are there any final thoughts that you would like to share?
Oh, it's just an exciting time to be in automotive, Fabian. Thank you for having me and for hosting us today.
Awesome. Let's stay in touch. Thank you.
Awesome.